Today we're diving into a whirlwind of stories that are shaking the foundations of power on both sides of the Atlantic. Germany is making a dramatic move that could upend the lives of tens of thousands of families. Britain's most trusted media institution just faced a collapse that nobody saw coming. An explosive legal battle over a pipeline mystery is about to land in a Hamburg courtroom. And in the United States, a former president just signed an order that might bring down an entire generation of elites. But here's the thing, the most jaw-dropping revelation, the one that ties so much of this together, I'm saving that for the very end. So stick with me. I spent years on the inside of a major media organization, one you'd recognize instantly. I watched editors shape stories to fit predetermined narratives, saw inconvenient facts get buried, witnessed the machinery of spin operate in real time. Eventually, I realized I had a choice. Stay and compromise what I believed journalism should be, or walk away and tell you the unfiltered truth. I chose the latter. Now I'm here in Europe, independent, accountable only to you, and committed to showing you what's really happening beyond the headlines. Before we go further, I need to ask something. If you appreciate this kind of rigorous fact-checked reporting, if you value someone who's willing to dig through the noise and verify every detail to make sure you're not getting fed misinformation, please hit that like button and subscribe. And if you're able, consider sponsoring this channel. We put in exhausting hours, cross-referencing sources, tracking down documents, making sure every claim holds up under scrutiny. It's hard work, but it matters. Your support keeps this operation running, and seriously, stay until the end, because what I've got waiting there is going to reframe everything you just heard. Let's start in Germany, where the government under Friedrich Merz has just turned the page on migration policy in the most dramatic way imaginable. More than 53,000 Syrian asylum applications, cases that had been sitting in bureaucratic limbo, are suddenly back on the table. And the results, shocking, doesn't even begin to cover it. According to data from Bild and the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, young, able-bodied Syrian men are being rejected almost automatically. In October alone, out of 3,000 applicants, only one received asylum. One. The rest were handed rejection letters and given 30 days to leave the country after any court decision. Now here's where it gets complicated. These aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about families, people who've built lives in Germany, workers who've integrated into communities, individuals who thought they'd found safety, and the deportations themselves, they haven't actually started yet. They're in the preparation phase. But lawyers across Germany are bracing for an avalanche of lawsuits because here's the legal reality: any appeal automatically freezes the deportation process. So what we're looking at is a massive legal pileup, thousands of cases clogging the courts, families in limbo, and protests already erupting in Germany's largest cities. But let's pause for a second and ask the uncomfortable question. Why now? Why this sudden shift? Germany has been grappling with migration for years, and the political winds have been changing. The official line is that conditions in Syria have stabilized enough that return is feasible. But critics are saying this is political theater, a government trying to look tough on migration ahead of electoral pressure. And the timing, right as social tensions are already running high, raises serious questions about what's driving these decisions. Is it genuine policy reform, or is it optics? And here's what most people are missing. This isn't just about Germany. This is about a broader pattern we're seeing across Europe. A hardening of attitudes, a closing of doors that were once, if not wide open, at least slightly ajar. Italy, France, the UK, they're all watching what Germany does here, because Germany has historically been the bellwether for European migration policy. If Merz's government can pull this off, if they can actually implement mass rejections and deportations without triggering a complete political crisis, other countries will follow suit. That's the real story here, the precedent being set. Now let's talk about another story out of Germany, one that's smaller in scale, but perhaps even more chilling in its implications. In Baden-Württemberg, police raided the home of a libertarian named Damien N. His crime? He posted something on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, calling government officials parasites. That's it. That was enough to trigger a full-scale police operation. Officers burst into his home, seized his phone, forced him to provide biometric data, fingerprints, and even attempted to take a blood sample. His lawyers are calling this a new level of lawlessness, and they've got a point. Historically, fingerprinting and biometric collection in Germany were reserved for serious criminal accusations, violent offenses, major crimes. Now it's being applied to someone who criticized the government online. Think about that for a moment. We're not talking about threats. We're not talking about incitement to violence. We're talking about harsh words directed at public officials. And the state's response was to treat this man like a dangerous criminal. Here's where things get even more intriguing. Analysts are connecting this to the broader climate in Germany right now, the migration crisis, social unrest, economic anxiety. Authorities are tightening control over public discourse, and they're doing it in ways that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. The fragility of so-called freedom in the German justice system is once again being called into question, and this should worry you, regardless of where you stand politically, because once the state starts using heavy-handed tactics to silence criticism, it rarely stops at one case. The machinery, once it's built, tends to keep running. Let's cross the channel now to the United Kingdom, where a court case has just delivered a verdict that's leaving people on all sides shaking their heads. A Turkish migrant was awarded compensation because, and I want you to hear this clearly, because wearing a GPS tracking bracelet for 3 months caused him emotional distress. The court found that the constant surveillance led to depression, violated his human rights, and warranted financial compensation from the state. Now, put aside your immediate reaction for a second and let's look at the details. The man was being monitored because authorities wanted to track his movements, standard procedure for certain immigration cases. But his lawyers argued successfully that 3 months of knowing your every step is being watched takes a psychological toll. Medical experts backed this up, diagnosing depression linked directly to the monitoring, and the court agreed. British taxpayers are now on the hook for compensation, and they're not happy about it. But here's the twist. Instead of scaling back this practice, British authorities are talking about expanding it. The number of undocumented migrants in the UK is rising, and officials see GPS monitoring as a cost-effective alternative to detention. So we're heading toward a scenario where more bracelets are being deployed, more people are being tracked, and if this court ruling sets a precedent, potentially more compensation claims down the line. It's a collision between human rights law and immigration enforcement, and nobody seems to have figured out how to reconcile the two. And what about the public? Polling shows deep divisions. Some see this as a triumph for human dignity, others see it as absurd overreach by the courts, rewarding someone who's in the country without legal status. There's no easy answer here, but one thing's certain, this case is going to be cited in courtrooms for years to come, and it's going to shape how democracies balance security concerns with individual rights. Now let's talk about the BBC. If you grew up anywhere in the English-speaking world, the BBC was the gold standard, the voice of impartial, trustworthy journalism. That reputation just took a devastating hit. The Director General, Tim Davie, and the head of news, Deborah Turness, both gone, resigned in the wake of a leaked 19-page report that accuses the broadcaster of systemic bias. The allegations are damning. According to the report, the BBC failed to maintain balance in its coverage of wars and social conflicts. It allowed what critics are calling Trumpist rhetoric to creep into its programming. And perhaps most controversially, it's accused of advocating for transgender issues rather than reporting on them neutrally. For an organization that's funded by millions of British license fee payers, this is nothing short of catastrophic. The resignations are being described as a seismic moment. The BBC has weathered scandals before, but losing both the Director General and the head of news simultaneously, that's unprecedented. And it raises a fundamental question: can the BBC survive this? Public trust, once lost, is incredibly hard to rebuild. And right now, a lot of people in Britain are asking whether they should keep paying the license fee to fund an organization they no longer believe is serving them fairly. But let's dig a little deeper, because this isn't just about the BBC. This is about a broader crisis in media trust that's happening globally. People don't believe institutions anymore. They don't trust that they're getting the full story. And when a pillar like the BBC, an organization with almost a century of history, starts to crumble under accusations of bias, it confirms what a lot of people already suspected, that the mainstream media has lost its way. The BBC's crisis is a microcosm of a much larger problem. Let's shift to a story that's been simmering under the surface for months and is now coming to a boil. Italy's highest court has approved the extradition of Sergei Kuznetsov, a 49-year-old Ukrainian national, to Germany. Kuznetsov is accused of involvement in the sabotage of the Nordstream pipelines, one of the most significant acts of infrastructure destruction in recent European history. He's set to be handed over to Hamburg prosecutors within 10 days. Now, if you've been following this case, you know it's been wrapped in layers of intrigue, conflicting narratives, and geopolitical finger-pointing. The Nord Stream pipelines, which carried Russian gas to Europe, were blown up in what many suspect was a deliberate act of sabotage. The question has always been, who did it, and more importantly, who ordered it. Kuznetsov's extradition means we're finally going to see some of this play out in a courtroom, under oath, with evidence and testimony. Kuznetsov himself has been complaining about his conditions in Italian custody. He's on a hunger strike demanding dietary accommodations. Whether that's genuine distress or legal theater is anyone's guess. But the bigger picture here is what this trial could reveal. European judicial practices are going to be tested, transatlantic security relationships are on the line, and depending on what comes out in Hamburg, we could see a major shift in how Europe views the pipeline sabotage and who they hold responsible. Think about the stakes for a moment. If Kuznetsov is convicted, and the evidence points to Ukrainian involvement, how does that affect Europe's support for Ukraine? If the evidence points elsewhere, or if it's inconclusive, what does that do to the credibility of the investigation? This case is a powder keg, and it's about to explode in a Hamburg courtroom. Now let's turn to the United States, where immigration enforcement is ramping up in ways that are grabbing headlines and dividing public opinion. In Michigan, 2 business owners have been charged with illegally hiring more than 240 individuals with criminal immigration violations. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. New data from federal immigration enforcement shows that nearly 2 million undocumented migrants are currently living in the United States without legal status, and of those, more than 423,000 have serious criminal records. ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, is intensifying operations in response. Raids, detentions, deportations, all of it is escalating. But here's where the narrative gets complicated. Advocacy groups are pointing out that among those being detained are people who've been working, contributing, living quiet lives. Drivers, cooks, construction workers, people with families, people who've been here for years. The question becomes, where do you draw the line? On one side, you have the law and order argument. These individuals entered or stayed in the country illegally. Many have criminal records. Enforcing immigration law is a fundamental responsibility of the state. On the other side, you have the humanitarian argument. These are human beings, many fleeing desperate circumstances, many integrated into communities, many with children who were born here and are American citizens. Deporting them tears families apart and, some argue, undermines the very values America claims to uphold. There's no clean answer here, and that's what makes it so contentious. But one thing's undeniable, the scale of this is massive. 2 million people without legal status, 423,000 with criminal records. These aren't abstract numbers. These are lives, families, communities. And whatever happens next is going to have profound consequences. And now we arrive at the story I promised you, the one that's going to tie so much of this together and leave you questioning just how deep the rot goes. Former President Donald Trump has signed an executive order mandating that the Department of Justice release all files related to Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, as well as any records concerning the circumstances of Epstein's demise in prison. If that doesn't make your ears perk up, it should. For those who followed the Epstein saga, you know this isn't just about one man's crimes. This is about a network, a web of power, money, and influence that reached into the highest echelons of politics, business, and entertainment. Epstein's private island, his connections to world leaders, his unexplained wealth, all of it has been the subject of speculation, conspiracy theories, and legitimate investigative journalism. And now, if Trump's order is carried out, we might finally get some answers. The implications are staggering. We're talking about potential revelations that could implicate prominent figures across multiple industries. Uncomfortable names, millions of dollars changing hands, elite gatherings that were anything but innocent, all of it could be laid bare. The public has been holding its breath for years, waiting for the other shoe to drop. This might be it. But let's be skeptical for a moment, because we need to be. Trump signing this order doesn't guarantee full transparency. There are mechanisms for redaction, national security exemptions, legal challenges that could tie this up in courts for years. And we have to ask, why now? Why is Trump pushing this? Is it genuine commitment to accountability, or is it strategic, a way to damage political opponents while insulating himself? We don't know yet, but what we do know is that the Epstein files, if they're fully released, have the potential to reshape public understanding of power in America. So let's take a step back and look at what we've covered today. Germany is closing its doors to thousands of Syrian asylum seekers, setting a precedent that could ripple across Europe. A libertarian in Germany is facing police raids for criticizing the government online, a chilling sign of how fragile free speech protections really are. A British court awarded compensation to a migrant for emotional distress caused by GPS monitoring, even as authorities plan to expand that very practice. The BBC, one of the world's most respected news organizations, is in crisis after resignations tied to allegations of systemic bias. Italy is extraditing a Ukrainian national to Germany over the Nordstream pipeline sabotage, a case that could redefine European security debates. The United States is grappling with nearly 2 million undocumented migrants, and Trump has ordered the release of the Epstein files, a move that could expose an entire generation of elites. These aren't isolated incidents. They're all part of a larger story, a story about power, control, accountability, and the battles being fought over who gets to decide what truth looks like. If today's episode made you think, if it challenged you, if it gave you information you didn't have before, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and if you're in a position to do so, consider sponsoring this channel. What we do here, the fact-checking, the digging, the refusal to accept surface-level narratives, it takes time and resources. Your support makes it possible. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.